Okay, great. Okay. Right, well, I'll hand over to you in that case, Steve, and leave you to do the introductions.
Well, first of all, can you just move on to the next slide
Yep.
here, because we're now at 1800. I noticed online we have roughly 46 people currently on the call at the moment, so it's good. It was originally sold out, as you probably saw some time ago, so there is a lot more still to arrive, I hope. We'll see how it goes there. But if we go on to the next slide, please. Okay. Well, welcome everyone to the Resilience Association COVID-19 Exit Surgery. It's the first in our series of webinars that we've run as an organisation, and I do thank you for joining us, as you know, and to listen to people who I'm joined with today. Kevin Breer, he's the Crisis Manager Insights for Exit. Gary Hibbard, who you've heard a lot from if you've been on the call for a while so far, is going to give us a 7-step cybersecurity exit strategy. Jeff Charlton, who's going to be looking at workspace pandemic recovery, and you really need to listen to this one. Aaron Gracie, on one of the big issues we're facing here are workforce mental health considerations. And Mike Price, challenges facing international workers, not least with the supply chain issues as well. So we have received some questions already, but I would ask you all to, if you do have questions, can you use the chat on the on our system here? We will be attempting to answer them during each of the presentations you're going to be seeing, but if we are running out of time, we will actually post them, answer your questions on our website, which you'll see shortly. So at the end, if you've got any further questions, it should be sent to info@resilienceassociation.org. So that's our main point of contact for the Resilience Association. And at the end of this, the slides you're going to be seeing will be available on our website, resilienceassociation.org. Hopefully by the start of next week, if not sooner. And you'll also find more information about what the Resilience Association was established for and its aims and objectives for the future. But that's not what we're here to talk about, so I won't bore you with that part at the moment. Where we are at the moment, well, globally, most countries are now at a different stage of locking down. And here in the UK, well, the government is due to plan the lockdown the 7th of May through COBRA against the 5-point criteria. The decision to extend this will be made by the 11th of May, and certainly we are trying to take an international approach, but a lot of this is driven by the activities we're seeing here in the UK as well. So what are the changes we need to consider as we approach the new normal? I've just listed certain areas here. Business survival from a crisis. Employees available to return to work and who work from home. Quite key, this one. I mean, are they going to be confident enough to travel into their workplace? In fact, even get onto the trains? Are they prepared? What state are they in from a mental health point of view? The employee's safety when they leave home and travel to the workplace, and whilst they're in the workplace. We want to really focus on that particular area. And when we open up these workplaces, the day-to-day management of them and timings for the end of the workday. You know, there is a high likelihood that organisations, based upon the numbers they can get into their locations, will be pushed into a position to consider how that working day will work and whether or not they have to introduce other areas to complete that work. There was an interesting thing that's come out today from Barclays CEO, and he says putting 7,000 people in a building may be a thing of the past. And this brings into question a lot of organisations, operations, and also shared buildings as well. some quite interesting things that I know Jeff's going to bring up. And certainly from international operations here, you know, the impacts on the supply chain I mentioned, and travel between one country to another, with all the borders being held back from crossing into them, international travel via other means being closed down. Quite interesting things that are happening. So this exit strategy aims in the time frame to make you think about such challenges. I noticed from Jeff sent a message out to all the panelists here. So thanks for that, Jeff. You know, temperature scan is only useful if people are in fever and have elevated temperature. Not very accurate, especially asymptomatic. And a lot of the testing is bringing out the numbers of people who are asymptomatic at this time. Okay, lots of areas we'll be touching on in a very short period of time. Remember, this is just for 1 hour. And so I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Kevin Breer. Kev, you there, mate?
Yes, I am. Thanks, Steve. And Gary, if I can have the first slide, please. Thank you very much, Gary. So what we're going to talk about here in my 5 minutes, we're going to talk about a crisis management approach to this. There has been some debate on social media over the past few weeks about the effectiveness of business continuity response in relation to the current pandemic. Obviously, with a business continuity response, that's often a very operational type process when one's dealing with BIAs and service level agreements and things like that. That doesn't really translate well into when you're dealing with an existential crisis, and the fact that you cannot actually do any production because you've been ordered to close by the government. So we're going to look at how a crisis management response could perhaps be a little bit more helpful, and we'll talk a little bit about the crisis management standard that's available from the BSI. For those of you that aren't already aware, the BSI have opened up a whole series of resilience standards: the crisis management one, the organizational resilience one, the business continuity standard 22301, 22313. The website's link is on my slide. If you click on that, one can register and gain those standards. So let's crack on, shall we? So all crises have a life cycle with a distinct phase in that life cycle. Each of those phases will have problems and challenges that you need to think about. Some of the challenges will be unique to that phase, and then some of the challenges will cross the verticals, such as communications, getting the correct messaging out to the correct stakeholders, and actually gathering relevant information and using that information effectively and actually disseminating the wheat from the chaff when it comes to that information. I've already spoken about the standard that's available. It came out in 2018, and we're currently working to update that to an ISO standard at the moment, but it's not a bad base point still. You'll find a lot of useful information, and the best way to deal with a crisis is to deal with a principles-led approach. And that's the main difference between crisis management and business continuity. Rather than developing loads of plans and scenarios, the theory with crisis management is that you build the principles, the capability principles within an organization, and you give the people the tools with which to deal with the crisis. And so the scenario becomes agnostic, and the organization is able to deal with the crisis regardless of what scenario comes along if they have those principles set up. So let's talk about those key phases of a crisis. Pre-crisis, that's before the event strikes. During that phase, you build capability, you try to identify who your team members will be, and once you've identified the team members, you equip and train them. In the current situation. We've obviously gone past the training phase. However, that doesn't mean that we can't perform tabletop exercises, talk through potential scenarios that could unfold in front of us. And that's particularly relevant for what we're talking about today, because my colleague is going to talk to you about some of the challenges that are going to perhaps present themselves as the lockdown is gradually opened up. And then people need to think about what that means for that. It's going to, or the changes that's needed in their response capabilities in their organizations. Next piece is the response phase. That's understanding what's happened. That's building a shared understanding of the situation. So that means that everyone in the crisis management team and the crisis management response actually understands what's going on. And then once you've understood that and the impacts, you define your objectives and your strategies, and then you sort out the resources and the equipment that you need to deal with the situation and to face the challenge. Next phase is consolidation or stabilization phase. Basically, in a nutshell, we try to stop things getting worse, but in our world, that's where we've got to now. Then recovery phase, return to normality or new normality, as Steve's spoken about, and then we get to post-crisis, learning from the crisis. Next slide, please. Thank you very much. So this is what we need to think about at this current time in the next couple of minutes. So each organization needs to understand the capabilities that it has at hand. If it has a shortfall in those capabilities, it needs to build on them quickly and get them from wherever they can. You need to select the correct objectives and strategies, and those objectives and strategies will change as we go through it. At the moment, we're protecting life and people, which is absolutely correct. But as this crisis unfolds, we're going to move more to an economic crisis and think about what that means for us. I've already spoken about training. Flexibility and adaptability are the key elements in this current crisis. We're making it up as we go along. There is no precedent in living memory, and so we have to be able to use what we've got and be flexible with those tools. The guy is going to talk about safe working practices in the future, but one of the things that we need to think about is actually reassuring our staff members and stakeholders that whatever we put in place are effective and appropriate, and how we convey that message. And the piece that I keep emphasizing, particularly from a cyber perspective, and Gary's going to talk about that in a moment, is that although we're dealing with the current COVID-19 crisis, that doesn't mean that nothing else is going to come along and cause us disruption. So what we need to think about is what would happen if our technology that we're all dependent upon is currently rendered unusable. And I've already spoken about the economic downturn in the future. And that is me concluded, and I will now hand you over to Gary Hibbard, who will talk about the cyber challenges ahead of us.
Yeah, thank you for that. No, it's really interesting to hear you talking there, Kev, about those different response phases and such. And in cyber security, one of the key issues or the key challenges that we often have is that in crisis management or business continuity, there's been a lot of focus on some of the very tangible crisis and issues that are out there, and less so around data breaches and what to do if there's in the event of a cyber attack. So I am going to just talk for just a few minutes about what I see as being some of the challenges, if you like, but also the to-do list, to give you something practical that I think people need to think about when we are getting into those exit phases and that restore phase. I put all the information up on screen here just in one lump, so that you can actually take that information and take a screen grab if you wish. But as Steve has said, you know, these slides will be available later on. The first thing that I think when we start to get into the recovery and the exit, whatever that exit starts to look like or when it comes around, is about setting some clear policies and guidance around the reintroduction of devices into office. We've sent our staff out, you know, part of the contingency plans that we put in place, either very quickly or that have been there for a long time, was to go and work remotely. And certainly those organisations that struggled in the early stages to initiate their plans. They were just putting people out into back into homes and saying, anecdotally, one example I had was someone said literally commandeer your kids' laptops. So suddenly you've got devices that have got company related data on those devices. How are you going to reintroduce either the devices that haven't been connected fully to the network and therefore don't have the up-to-date patching and anti-malware installed, or indeed have been devices that haven't been thoroughly checked by your teams in the first place. So if you're going to start putting a plan together to reintroduce these devices, having those clear policies, working with your IT team to understand that, and also your cybersecurity team. You need to identify your first wave of workers that are going to be coming back. So again, you know, just like any good business impact analysis that will have been performed, which talks about the minimum number of people that are required in a crisis situation or a continuity incident, you need to start to think about how you're going to reintroduce people back into the workplace. Do you bring everyone back at the same time? Is it certain teams? Which members of those teams? So starting to put those plans in place now is a really great idea. Again, and just to re-emphasize that point about data that sits on these devices, setting out clear rules for the collection of data as well. People will have been making notes, they'll have been writing things on a pad, they'll have been printing things out perhaps in their home office. How are you going to reintroduce that data back into the office environment and collect it from all those disparate devices or in different locations? And that follows on to the next step, which is just this idea of, well, once you've got all of this information and you've assimilated it back onto your primary systems, how are you going to destroy that data? There's going to be potentially USB sticks, there's going to be hard drives perhaps that have all this information that you need to think about that destruction of hardware. But importantly, with that idea about clear instructions about the destruction of data is, you know, these uncontrolled devices, how are you going to get that information back onto your systems, which is back to the previous point. If you furloughed staff, what are the new risks that we're introducing to an organization, and have we really thought those through? In cybersecurity, quite often we talk about the insider threats, and we talk about the fact that human error is one of the primary causes for a data breach. Well, we're going to be reintroducing people into the workplace that have been working in isolated areas, and I know Aaron's going to talk about well-being and mental health and such, but people under lots of stress, you know, the potential for error is greater, the potential for disgruntled employees is going to be increased. So again, thinking about what additional risks that presents to you as an organization is something that you really need to think through. These are the uncomfortable conversations I think are important. And developing a communication and training plan for cybersecurity. You should be doing that now anyway. We've seen an increase in cybercrime, but certainly reintroducing people back into your workplace, thinking about what additional security type of training is required. And if you are certified to some of the standards that Kev mentioned, you know, 27001, 22301, it's about really just thinking, well, how am I going to get back up to speed in terms of my audits, my management reviews and such. So speaking to your certification bodies to make sure that you have a clear set of actions and a plan. Perhaps you have a CAV, a continual assessment visit coming up. If you have, then what does that mean to you? So this is your to-do list from a cybersecurity perspective, and certainly some of the things that I'm talking to people about. And with that, I'm going to hand over to our next speaker, which is... Sorry,
Gary, there's a question just come up for you. You know, have you seen an increase in cybercrime, and do you expect this to continue when we return back to normal?
Yes, in a word. The action fraud, which is the effectively the cyber police, the law enforcement area that deals with reported cybercrime, they reported recently a 400% increase in in cybercrime, in phishing emails and such. I think Google have blocked something in the region of about 18 million COVID-19 related cyber attacks or phishing emails and such. And again, anecdotally, this past 3 or 4 weeks, we have seen within Cyber4 an increase in people's websites being hacked or their systems being infected with ransomware and such. And in one particular case, a significant amount of money, and we're talking hundreds of thousands of pounds, being transferred to cyber criminals through a mandate fraud, because they know that people are working remotely and therefore are more vulnerable.
Yeah, and David just said we have seen specific targeting of COVID-19 research in university sector, also NHS.
The thing I would sort of finish on that really is that when people say to me that, you know, will I be a victim? Will they target me? I'm a charity or such. Just to remember that the cyber criminals are targeting the NHS. They are targeting hospitals. They don't care. So yes, they trade in fear, uncertainty, and doubt, and that's certainly something that is the whole world is gripped in right now.
Thanks, Gary. So, Jeff, over to you, mate.
Thanks, Steve. Whether a CBRN terrorist attack, industrial accident, or pandemic, the business response should be similar. Defend buildings and protect occupants with 2 basic goals. Increase employee attendance by increasing workplace safety and confidence. Reduce employee absenteeism by developing and maintaining visible safety protocols and effective risk management. They need to be seen. We need people to know that it's going on. The shutdown of many buildings for long periods can see decay and biological amplification in the workplace, especially the HVAC systems. COVID-19 may wrongly be considered the cause of new building-related health issues, such as sore and itchy eyes, sore throat, and of course flu-like symptoms, and even skin rashes. While all workplaces are at risk or of a concern, multiple occupancy buildings, especially with managed air systems, are a major concern. The key message to everyone should be the most sensible action, and indeed the legal obligation, as stated by the Health and Safety Executive. PPE is the last resort, and engineering controls have reduced or eliminated the hazard. This means the issuing of PPE is not seen as a legal compliance or indeed likely to provide adequate protection. First slide, please. This example shows the speed of contamination spread between floors of any form of airborne contamination. The left-hand side is extract with supply coming in from the right. The HVAC system or plenum is on the roof. Remember, it may or may not be COVID, but a sore throat is an employee alarm likely to result in panic or absenteeism or unnecessary lockdown or isolation. Here we see the speed at which contamination can move from floor to floor. And remember, most air handling units only introduce 10% fresh air, and the remaining 90% supply was extracted from other floors or areas which is mixed in the plenum. This is on the roof. The filtration is extremely limited. Won't stop. The filtration is worse than the PPE that people are given as face masks. The filtration is extremely limited, and the mixed air will be introduced through vents into your workspace. After a short-term shutdown like Christmas or Easter bank holidays, we often return to strange odours. The current shutdown over months is likely to see bioamplification and associated odours and possible health risks to some. While HVAC systems may be turned off, it is not closed or sealed, and warm and cooler air can infiltrate, move around, resulting in dew point condensation with the potential for bioamplification. Transmission of COVID-19 is known to be from fomites, that's surface contamination, and or inhalation and eye exposure. Have you adequate, suitable and workable controls in place to reduce all three? Many normal practices may have to be altered to show employees evidence of visible or even perceived management safety controls. The unfortunate reality is fear may result in more casualty and financial loss than COVID-19. Second slide, please. Air pathways can carry odours, particles, and possibly coughs and sneezes. Mould, bacteria, and of course infectious diseases such as flu can easily move around the buildings. We've just seen that in the first slide. That first slide, by the way, was a slide that I used showing the spread of anthrax from just a simple letter opening. So these are well-founded facts. Are you controlling your environment, or do you rely on somebody else? Has the building been sanitised, and with what? And are there the usual hazardous residues? The cruise ship Sea Princess was confirmed with active COVID-19 17 days after evacuation. Many companies are offering decontamination protocols. They don't work. They just simply don't work. And many of them test with ATP, PCR, RNA. They all provide false positives and negatives, and they can result in needless and expensive decontamination and or lockdown. Typical issues to consider, and there are many more than these. Lifts can act as pumps, and even office door opening creates huge air movement. Stratification of particulates and failures of normal filtration. Ceiling mounted extracts cause particles to travel past and through breathing zones. It's extracted up to the ceiling, past your nose and mouth. What installed engineering controls can quickly be manipulated to increase defence and protection of the workforce? What auxiliary controls may be required and temporarily installed? Most importantly, who's in charge of your air and your environment, and who controls its quality and who shares it? You need verified evidence and not from conventional assessments of trust me. You're only as safe as your weakest link. You will never be completely safe, but with risk reduction, you'll be safer. Perhaps our job is to convince employees they are safer at work than at home, but we have to address travel issues as well. Thank you.
Jeff, thanks. So we had a question that came in before this, which, you know, we're in a multi-occupancy building on the 18th floor. It brings out some points you've already said so far. Would it be safer on the ground floor?
Well, that's a good question. Well, as we saw, the ground floor would be breathing air exhaled from another floor. The lift providing air would be pumping air around the ground floors and all the other areas. The accumulation of visitors or lift passengers could see airborne virus loading increase, therefore increasing occupants' exposure. The ground floor should be isolated, in my opinion, and transformed into a PPE donning and doffing area with decontamination protocols involved for employees entering or leaving the building. Training in don and doff, personal decontamination, travel issues, risk reduction at home and work. The workplace should be safer than home if we're expecting to see people turn up. So I think that people should, you know, it's no good saying, well, will I be safe lower down? You've got the same air, you've got more traffic on the ground floor. I don't think anybody should be on the ground floor, to be honest. So, you know, if the first floor maybe, then we go from there.
Thanks, Jeff. Just before I go to hand over to you, Aaron, there's quite an interesting one just came in here from somebody called AC37, so I can't say the person's name. Why would we be using lifts? Assume not 18 floors, of course. Why would organisations use, you know, if you take some of the big towers in Canary Wharf, would they be using the lifts?
Well, you can use the lifts. I mean, look, I just had a meeting with management on the 4th floor of a building, and I said, I'm not walking up those stairs. You'll have to bring the management down to me because I'm not prepared to walk up 4 floors wearing breathing apparatus. So, you know, maybe I can get away with that because of my age, but the reality is I don't think you're going to find many employees walking up 10 floors to an office. So yes, the lifts can still be used, but engineering controls need to be introduced so that they can be used safely.
Yeah, that certainly answers the second point, basically 37. But Nick here, he says, I'm disabled, so I need to use lifts.
Well, I'm saying you can use the lifts, but engineering controls need to be put in place to make sure that it's not just the people that use the lifts are safe, it's the people on the floor that as the door opens, air gets pumped into and sucked out of those floors. So, you know, I understand people need to use lifts. It has to be controlled so that it's safe to use a lift. And maybe hundreds of people flying up and down buildings is a thing of the past.
Yeah, Jeff, a lady called Wendy here, she said, what are the engineering controls? You mean social distancing or any other things? No? No,
social distancing is not engineering controls. Engineering controls is air management and how we manage the air in a building so that we've got positive pressure, negative pressure, we've got filtration in certain areas. Social distances, you could push call it social distance engineering controls, but that's not what I'm alluding to. It's engineering, not just social distancing.
Yeah, I mean, just one last piece here. Wendy's also put in here about HEPA filters on AHU increased fresh air ratios. So I'm unsure where she's going with that one, but certainly, do many buildings have HEPA filters and that on?
No, they don't. Some buildings have HEPA filters. What I've found time and time again is that the HEPA filter, they're very expensive. First of all, they're unlikely to be changed that often. That's the second thing. But thirdly, they're quite often wrongly fitted or badly fitted into the frame of the air handling unit. So they often leak around the perimeter.
Okay, so we have to move on now. Thanks very much for that, Jeff. Aaron.
Yes, thanks. And can I have the first slide, please, Gary? Thank you very much. Just to highlight here, before we go into this, what do we mean by the term social capital when we're looking at our mental health and our workforce? Well, social capital itself is, the effective functioning of social groups, through interpersonal relationships, a shared sense of identity, and also a shared understanding of the organization, the norms, values, trust, and cooperation within the organization. And that is something we've got to consider, because where we are now, and compared to where we were 3-4 months ago before lockdown, has put us in a position where we're actually seeing a change in how we will go forward. The issue we've got now, of course, is that we have just put the whole workforce through a massive cultural change in a blink of an eye. They've gone from working in offices, being able to see each other during the day, catching around the coffee tables for catch up, social and workplace, to then working from home and isolated. Now, for some individuals, the workplace was their social network. It was where they got the support frameworks that they needed, having that social engagement. And suddenly that has been removed. At the same time, through lockdown, we've also then lost the social networks. So now we find ourselves with employees living with families, having reduced their social frameworks by about 2/3, and likewise lost a lot of their support networks. Some may be completely isolated altogether. Likewise, for others, they have taken time to get themselves, if they're, for example, introverts, working alongside other people and become comfortable. They've now been pushed back into being isolated, working in small groups, and now they face the daunting task of coming and having to do that all over again. So again, there's certain things that we need to be aware of. And organizations need to understand this and think about how they're going to mobilize their social capital effectively. Because if it's not done properly, we can actually see a loss of capability and actually a reduction in the workforce through people leaving, feeling isolated, not thinking the organization cares about them or understands them. And a good example of this is the case study of Sandler O'Neill and Partners, which you can find online, either through YouTube, where there's a video capture of it, or on a few research articles published on it. And that looks how that organization actually recovered quite quickly, utilizing a massive effect of its social capital. Now, bringing our workforce back into the organization, we're going to have a strong occupational health framework in place. And you've got to also accept that your own occupational health framework may have been detrimentally damaged by the COVID-19. You may be running at between 10 to 20% understaffed. You may find that it's becoming overloaded with requests from the workforce coming in, and actually also your managerial staff are struggling to deal with the influx and the engagement as well. You're also now bringing the organization back up to main running. So if we look at the diagram on the bottom right, you're going to have your business objectives. The CEO and the leadership will want to get the business up and running as quick as possible, because they will have suffered an extreme amount of damage over the last 2 or 3 months. And this relates to the top graph, which if you look at it, organizations are running a business as usual. You've had that rapid drop off, the impact from COVID-19 lockdown, economic hit, which has then resulted in the organization falling down to its base level of resilience. And for some organizations, this was very low indeed. I've had cases of engagement with local authorities where they only start talking about the critical services after they were locked down. That's a bit late to be starting to think about that. We're now starting to go into the recovery, the business continuity and recovery phase. So we've actually lost quite a lot of service and capability. And we're now trying to get our organizations up and running as quick as possible. To do that, our leadership team are going to be looking at putting in a business strategy. Now, given where we are at the moment, this is also going to have to include a very effective and well-managed change strategy, because we've just gone through a massive, disruptive change to the organization and the workforce, and actually the economy itself. Linked to this, and given the issues around mental health, this is going to have to tie into a very robust and well-communicated HR strategy, which, as I've shown there, needs to consider all those various factors. Not just your talent management, but also your appraisal framework, because that will have changed and may not have happened this year. You're looking at potential dealing with losses or the need to retain workforce, recruit. Also, for some organizations, they'll be dealing with, excuse me, the death of some workforce and the implications that brings as well. And you may find that quite a lot of individuals may be going through the change curve and dealing with the grief curve of having lost either loved ones themselves or people that they've worked with. And this is the first time they've all come together collectively to grieve. Now, if you think pre-COVID-19, there was a 1 in 4 in the workforce experienced mental health issues. You've got to accept that this may be a lot larger when they come back into the business, because they're going to be dealing with the impact of having lost social networks, probably lost colleagues, family members, and also the increased threat that COVID-19 brings into the workforce. Likewise, coupled to that, recent research indicate that 1 in 5 staff feel unsafe in sharing their concerns with line managers. So you may be dealing with a level of presenteeism or absenteeism within the workforce that you don't even know the reasons why. Next slide, please, Gary. So, of course, with this then, and dealing with this, the individuals coming in the workplace are bringing a lot of stuff in with them. Okay? As we just discussed recently, there's going to be the issue of coming into work for itself. Social distancing, we look traveling on trains, local transport again. What issues is that bringing to them? And we saw the risk that had prior to us going into lockdown. So there's a fear of catching COVID-19 to or from work. If you think the recent research into the US aircraft carrier, the Theodore Roosevelt, identified that 60% of those tested had asymmetric systems. So therefore, they weren't even showing that they had the disease itself. So again, this is going to be playing on people's minds. You may also see a certain amount of the workforce not return due to health issues such as anxiety, depression, the psychological issues, the insecurity of coming into work. Could they catch it at work? They've managed to stay safe so long. Actually, am I going to catch it in or out of work or actually in the workplace itself? There may be the stigma if they've had it. What happens then? Are they going to be seen as being someone who to be avoided? And there also may be family pressures that they're dealing with at the moment, which they feel they can't give up and therefore stay at home and try and work from home. So with this, the organization has got to accept there'll be a certain period of time, a transition period, where there's going to be a loss of productivity, where people are going to have to learn to accept the new norm. Managers are going to have to manage that, and senior leadership are going to have to be sympathetic to that. Failing to do that may actually impact on the workforce willing to stay with the organisation, and maybe more detrimental than the effect we've seen so far. Of course, covering on to what Jeff raised earlier on, there's also the need to consider the available working spaces. We need to give the impression of keeping people safe. And again, if they're still suffering with the concerns and threats that they've gone through, you've got to consider the workforce age demographic as well. The workforce in some organisations, more than 50% are over 45. So again, that in itself brings concerns. If we have disabled workers who are used to working on the first and second floor, or maybe even the ground floor, what else do we need to consider around that? And finally, we've got to really consider that some employees coming back may experience survivor guilt. Not only having survived if friends and family have lost, but also because they have a job and those that they know don't have. So again, there's all that they're dealing with as well. So the HR strategy and the HR work, the teams that you have in place, plus the occupational health, are going to have to be aware of all these elements coming in. And the fact that this is going to be sitting with the workforce probably for the next few months as they come to terms with what the new world looks like. I'm now going to hand across to Mike.
Aaron, just one thing. We've got a question come in. I've got a couple of questions for you here from Ron. Will a review of lifestyle choices be a big factor to staff returning?
I think the lifestyle choice would be one, but I think the other is actually how the organisation is going to look after, give the approach to making sure that they feel safe within the workplace themselves. Because actually, not in the lifestyle change of individuals, but if you think, especially hot desking. So let's take, for example, in most organisations going on lean and the drive to cut down costs, we're all, we're sharing desks, we're sharing phones, we're leaping in and out of offices to have conferences. So this, and again, given what we've now seen and the way we move out of lockdown, will be bringing serious issues for organisations because if they're used to having 2 or 3 people share a desk, now that may limit the capability they've got, and they may be needing to see that the certain space that they kept for people getting out, breakout areas, discussion rooms may actually become working areas.
Okay, we just had another one coming from, there's a couple popping in now really, but one from Kevin. Is there consideration for equality impact assessment of policy and decision? I think with that, I don't think there's a policy and decision, right? And again, this will be specific to each organisation. I think there needs to be an understanding of the impact of what this could do to the organisation, both at workforce level and at that higher level. But I also think this is going to tie into with the HR strategy linking directly to the communications team and communicating all this out prior to the workforce arriving into the workplace. Writing this strategy as the workforce rocks up at the door is too late, because actually there needs to be that support, that framework, that security in place for them before they actually open that door and walk in, because they will have left being concerned. The events over the last 3-4 weeks. In fact, we look at 26,000 plus have now suffered from have died from this disease. Will have these concerns at the front of people's minds, and they're bringing, as that diagram shows there, they're bringing concern from the external environment, which they will have no control over. They're then looking at what pressures the internal workplace is putting onto them, family pressures, and their own individual concerns. And this is all before we then start looking at the amount of work that is left to do. So we've been doing business continuity. Business continuity by default is keeping critical services only working. The organizations will have a lot of the day-to-day work that hasn't been touched. And if you're working at a reduced staffing and trying to cut the large bar wave waiting behind you, there is a risk of burning your staff out long before you get anywhere through the pile of work left over. Thanks, Aaron. I'll be kind of just after this one, Mike, but we've really good point that Malcolm's raised here. He's obviously referring back to what we're seeing on TV and various articles, such as one in Charter Management Institute. And I recommend people looking at World Economic Forum leading through the 4th Industrial Revolution, when the front page says putting people at the centre, in the knowledge of what I'm about to say here. He asks, what does the panel think of the opportunity to reduce capital expenditure, revenue expenditure, and the potential staff costs? you know, because of this event?
I think it's the option. We've got to be careful. We'll get careful here, because yes, there's the option of, with this revolution in how we work now, of being able to work from home. I've seen some drives saying, our intelligence or intelligent IA will actually bring the way forward, and it will actually help us work faster, smarter, and more effectively, and it will increase our resilience and our capability. People are our agile capability. They are the ones that will keep us going when we're in trouble. And as we've seen, if we cut ourselves too lean, or we rely too much on technology, we can actually cut ourselves short when we're faced with a crisis where we need to move and be very agile. So I think it's got to be taken with other things in consideration. There is the option to move, not having 7,000 people in an office, and actually distribute them and work through, remotely through effective IT systems. But again, that's then got to become part of the strategy. And the concern is organizations will think this is a quick win to save some money, but putting in a proper, well-protected IT framework, properly designed, that was supported by the right architecture, will probably be a far greater output at the short term. Because not only that, there's going to be all the servers and the frameworks and regular updating of the IT systems and protective systems and security networks to ensure that that workload remains safe. So again, this comes back to what Gary was looking at from the whole IT cybersecurity piece. It's not a quick win. It's got to be properly thought about as a strategy going forward.
Okay, thanks, Aaron. Guy, we will come back to you if you've got time at the end. It's a really good question you raised here, but Mike, obviously we're running out of time here. Please carry on.
Thanks, Steve. Good evening, everybody. So this evening, I'm just going to be covering a look at challenges facing international workers, some personal reflections and some thoughts around how organisations with international workers may want to look at the recovery and resumption phases. This comes from some of our work at national resilience in private organisations in other countries, and some quite extensive travel throughout the period, moving from pre-declaration through to the current situation. Just to be clear, when I'm talking about international workers, I'm talking about those who are working outside their country of residence on a temporary basis, and that may include expat consultants or employees heading abroad on behalf of their company. Next slide, Gary. So before I move into the recovery and resumption phases, I just wanted to give a little bit of a flavour, give you a flavour of some of the experiences seen and heard moving from sort of pre-declaration of the pandemic to the current position. There was quite a bit of people getting caught out, people abroad, cessation of flights without notice, sudden border closures. Although they were on the horizon, the exact timing of those was often not disclosed by the host country. And people often found, or quite a few people I know, and I've heard of others getting stuck abroad for extensive periods of time. Some of the challenge that brings around visa expiry and having no option to leave the country to reset their visa, and therefore having no option but to stay beyond the life of their visa with no mechanism to extend it. Various concerns around healthcare prioritisation, and whether expatriate workers may be deprioritised within those systems, depending on the pressure faced. And again, some elements around infection monitoring and reporting, and whether the information people are receiving, certainly in the public domain, are necessarily accurately reporting the situation around COVID. There were questions around and concerns around essential service resilience, and some of the challenges people were facing as curfews within certain areas of the country were reducing the ability to travel. As some people left countries, returned home, there were questions around reliability and availability of communication systems between countries, and in particular, organisations dealing with sensitive data and sensitive data of their clients suddenly found that they were no longer able to access some of the systems they were reliant upon to deliver their work. Supply chain uncertainty, and then linking in to reliability of information and media access, as I've mentioned. Is the information that you're receiving about the situation in the country you're visiting accurate, and therefore allowing you to make the best judgment and an informed decision around the safety of your stay within that location? And then there were some examples I've seen and heard of around opportunistic threats, whether it's political uncertainty and using the powers granted for responding to COVID, or whether it's a malicious actor. And you may have seen, although hidden a bit in the news because of all the other problems with the pandemic, certainly in the Middle East, an attack from a malicious actor was the first in a couple of years that came just as the country was starting to lock down, and almost seen as an opportunity to test the resolve of the security sector while they were trying to battle with pandemic. Ineffective emergency plans, I mean, the main focus there is an over-reliance on others to help you out. I saw a number of clients and others struggling with this reliance upon the Foreign and Commonwealth Office to get people out, where the reality was that to pull people out of all the countries around the world was never going to be the case. And all of that created a huge psychological impact for people abroad. Gary, next slide. So in terms of recovery and resumption, what I wanted to do was just touch upon some of the thoughts that we've been having and conversations we've been having with clients around moving back into a world post-pandemic. And some of the challenge I think we'll first see, as touched upon by others, is the variation of restrictions, both between countries and within countries. Where we may see differences or greater differences than we're seeing now around exit and entry rules, expectations around quarantine and isolation on arrival in the country, social distancing expectations, and important there is actually a difference between the actual expectations and what people perceive them to be. And a lot of that can cause people problems and challenges when it comes to making decisions about whether it is safe to start returning abroad. And again, there are questions around essential services and validity in particular here, I think, of insurances. Are they going to still cover you if you travel abroad, either while the coronavirus pandemic is still declared at that level, or afterwards? What are going to be, or what are the new restrictions that face your various insurance policies as an organisation and as an individual when travelling abroad? There will undoubtedly be, for people, commercial pressure to return to travel, and I just wonder whether and how, whether that driver for sort of organisational survivalism and a need to perform, client expectations for you to return to their country and start work, and that pressure for face time versus actual performance. And it was touched upon with Malcolm's comment around, do you actually need to be face to face, or do you need to, the location is less important than actually the work you're doing and the output. And another thing around the cultural shift is actually, is there a need to travel, and will organisations start to review that both from a safety perspective, but also somebody else has touched upon around a financial element to the need to travel. And the last couple of points are around in-country response. How will expatriates on arrival and while in a host country be viewed by their host citizens? Will there be negative behaviour and actions towards people built from fear and probably misguided fear about the virus being brought back into their country? Certainly my recommendation is around reliable emergency plans, but ideally you don't want to be putting your staff, if possible, in a position where they need to be used. So I think a realistic review of risk assessments before travel is going to be essential. And lastly is that psychological impact. Will staff want to travel? Will they feel they can travel safely? And how will organisations address that? Will they find if they push staff to travel abroad, they see increased absence? Will refusal to travel by an employee be seen as a disciplinary action, perceived to be irrational? Or will more leeway in decision making be given to the individual to make decisions around the need to travel? And that's everything, right?
Okay, Mike, thanks very much for that. There's a whole rush of questions all zooming off on the chat link here. I think, Jeff, have you answered the one about the research issue on COVID-19? Jeff? Hello? Okay. I've seen some stuff going through on the chat.
Sorry, Steve, I was muted.
Yeah, have you responded to that COVID-19 issue about research?
Malcolm. Yes, I have. Yes, I have.
Thanks very much. And I see you've, there's a whole range of stuff here and information that Guy's putting out about law around DSE. Mike, I got one question that was put in before we start here for you. You may have touched on this, but I'll just raise it anyway. How do you see organisations learn from COVID-19 crisis and improving their resilience in international working going forward?
Thanks, Steve. Yeah, a really good question. I think focusing on self-reliance rather than governments when it comes down to things like evacuation planning. But I'm hoping that there'll be a much greater cultural acceptance of remote working in businesses and sort of more generally around networking and relationship management. You know, I think we all would say having experiences, we know a lot of what we perhaps thought we needed to do face-to-face can be done virtually with arguably equal success. So therefore, I think companies probably need to maintain at least a facility to operate in this way, even if it's not an embedded culture to remove for remote working, so that they can enhance their future resilience from both international and domestic threats. And it probably isn't going to be the last pandemic, whether it's the last pandemic in our lifetimes, who knows? But certainly there is also the argument that, you know, one of the ways we can protect ourselves from the pandemic will be around potentially deglobalizing our physical presence, where we can do things virtually. Although the caveat to that is obviously the social capital that we talked about, or Aaron talked about earlier. There are also some benefits around, you might touch upon, around environmental benefits from unnecessary business travel. But that has to be again offset in other areas, such as the energy and environmental demands for things like high definition video conferencing. So there will be a balance, but I'm hoping that organizations will become more resilient, or be more resilient, as a result of their experiences through COVID.
Okay, just one last question for the panel here, and it's they're zooming in fast and furious at the moment, but Louise mentioned I've experienced very positive examples of how organisation individuals have adapted and responded well to circumstances. Does the panel think that some of this might help people adapt again to new post-COVID-19 peak work? And we've seen some examples of discussions that have been going on about how these businesses get themselves up and running again. You still there, Kev? I think this could be something you've must have touched on.
Yeah, I think, well, I'm just reading the questions now about people working from home. I think actually, in terms of remote working and how it's used, certainly I've worked for organisations for the past 10 years now, where actually, because I'm in the world of cyber, where I am in the world doesn't really matter, and my teams have been globally dispersed. I think organisations will get their heads around it. The challenge obviously lies actually around how you then still manage the workforce risks that won't go away by people changing where they work. And that covers health and safety, that covers security, that covers the whole spectrum of HR risks. And at the moment, we're in a situation where people are being quite tolerant and are obviously all working towards the greater good to beat this despicable virus. But then actually, that's a very different scenario to a business as usual setup. So I think, although it has been a great learning curve, and we're all seeing some really interesting advantages coming out of the current situation, I think that actually a transition into a BAU or stable operating environment will have to be done very carefully, and there are very complex issues that will have to be thought through. Not an ideal answer, I would suggest, but an honest one.
Right. Thanks for that one. I was just about to respond back to Wendy's posting here, and we're at the end of this now. So we will be looking at these questions, and those that haven't been answered, we will be responding back. Christina's raised quite an interesting one, and there's been some quite political ones raised as well. But I would say to Wendy, we will be putting these, as I said at the beginning, on our website, resilienceassociation.org. Hopefully by the start of next week, and the questions that have been raised here in the Q&A session and others that haven't been fully answered yet, we do our utmost to try and respond back again via our main website. So I thank for everyone our presenters, our panelists, and also to all of you guys who've come on board this late time in the evening. But remember, the new world, the new normal is going to be more later times than this. So thanks again. And we will be looking at running more of these depending where decisions are made on the 7th of May and where we need to be positioned ourselves. So thanks very much for that.